Hello! For today's Jolly Lark, I'm going to answer some questions I've gotten about magnetizing the Song of Ice and Fire units. It's good to do this before the miniatures are painted. I use an inch wide zinc galvanized fender washers I picked up at the local hardware store. Magnets stick to these. It's good to use the zinc or the galvanized steel instead of stainless, because magnets don't always stick to stainless steel. So with a little bit of hot glue, this is the bottom of an infantry tray. Just put a little swirl of glue on, stick a magnet on, and it's okay to use hot glue here. I think it's faster and easier than super glue because these steel discs are only ever going to get pulled up by the magnets that we're then going to put on the bottom of the miniatures. You're never going to have any forces that are trying to pull them off. So if the bond attaching the steel washers to the tray is a little bit weaker, that's okay. For the magnets, here I'm using 4x2 neodynium magnets. I'll put some Amazon links down below. Wooden skewers are great because they don't stick to the magnets. I always keep some of those wooden skewers by the hobby desk. If you're using a silicone hobby mat or the palette paper like I've got here, you can just set the miniatures straight down on it. I'm doing this before the miniatures and the base tray are primed because I'm going to glue the grit directly onto the plastic. If you're using a textured paint, I would prime the miniatures and the tray first. This big old bag here I've probably had for almost 20 years. It's basically a 50-50 mix of Woodland Scenic's medium and fine ballast. I'm going to use a little square base as a scraper. The GW mold removal tool also works well. So for this, you want to go a little bit slowly, a little bit carefully, using the tip of the super glue bottle. Just kind of carefully trace in the lines. You don't want to get too much glue inside the openings. You kind of let the bottle follow the natural shape of the tray. It's not too tricky, but you're just putting on a very thin layer of super glue all over, trying to preserve the arrow markings and the corner markings on the tray. You absolutely could do this with a textured paste like Vallejo or Pro Acryl makes. You could use a textured paint like the one Citadel makes. I like the look of the grit and the glue, but the same principle applies here for any textured coating. But like I said, if you're using a textured paint, you always want to put paint on top of primer. So if you're using a textured paint, prime your tray and prime your minis first. So with the glue all over the top of the tray, it's nice to have this in a big bag. Just dunk that tray into that grit, kind of get it all over the top and shake it off. That's pretty much it. And here's where the square base comes in. Before the super glue is fully set up and dry, the glue, because the ballast is made out of a natural wood product, the ballast kind of sticks to the glue almost quickly, but the glue isn't quite set yet. So you can very quickly and easily just do a quick little once around with that square edged base. Any sharp edge will do. I don't like using a knife because it can cut the plastic, but any kind of mold line scraper, plastic base works great. Back to the trusty bamboo skewer. And again, because the glue isn't set yet, you can just kind of give those corner bits a quick scrape and open up those corner lines so that you're preserving those markings for the game, since those are important in the game. The glue is easier to remove now, so just make sure that a miniature is going to fit well in each opening. Make sure you haven't got any gravel overhanging that's going to cause the miniature to snag when you're taking them in and out of the trays. So for the miniatures, we're basically going to do the same idea, a little blob of super glue. I really like the impact resistant super glues that have come onto the market in the last few years. Gorilla Glue makes one, DAP makes one. Since I've switched to using the impact resistant glues, I just haven't had any problem with miniatures snapping. They seem a little bit less brittle when dry. Doesn't really matter for just putting grit on a flat surface, but for assembling miniatures and stuff, I really like the impact resistant styles of super glue. So a little thin layer of super glue on the top of the base, dunk it in the gravel. Yep, there you go. Song of Ice and Fire uses a few different sizes of trays. The monster and war machine size trays are deeper than the infantry and the cavalry, which makes magnetizing them a little tricky. So for those, what I do, because my goal here is to have these stick to a tin-lined figure case, you need to build it up a little bit, because if you put a magnet on the underside of these that's thick enough to reach the bottom, it's going to be too strong. So I'm getting here it is a thicker magnet. This is a 6x4 neodynium magnet. I'm putting it on a nice generous blob of hot glue and then pressing it down onto the palette paper to flatten it out and make it flush with the table while the glue is still soft. Dunk it in the grit, and you've got a nice surface that will take paint well. There's a couple different tricks you can do before the glue is fully set, while the glue is a little bit still hardening. So with the back end of our trusty skewer, the dull end, I'm just going to create some wheel tracks behind the chariot. Just kind of scrape it off. See, a little bit came off in kind of a sheet there, but it's no big deal. That happens sometimes, so you can fix it. Just kind of push and scrape a little bit while the super glue is still wet, and that can create those tracks behind the chariot. That's something that you can see the glue is still wet under there. That's something that doesn't really work once the glue is fully dry. Once the glue has fully dried and plasticized and become a hard material, you can't easily scrape it off like that. So it is good to do quickly and have an idea of what you want to do there while the glue is still wet. Just dab a little more glue on if you missed any spots or if you knock off a chunk like I just did there. No problem. And once those are painted up, those chariot tracks will look cool. Probably put that chariot up on the Instagram soon. If you want to follow me over on Instagram and see when that's finished up. You could grab the square base to scrape the sides. I think the Citadel mold line scraper is a nice tool for this. You can kind of get in there and apply a little bit more force to do those long straight edges of the tray. Just kind of keep it neat, have a nice neat appearance when it's done. Just scrape any gravel that you got onto the edges of the chariot or war machine monster tray there, like so. There you go. With everything's dry, you've got a unit that's ready to be painted. Notice there's not gravel on the rims. That's important for me to get the miniatures in and out, and looks fine when they're all painted up. So, a note on magnet sizes. On my Free Folk Raiders here, I've got 8mm magnets, and on the Thens that I just magnetized, I've got 4mm magnets. The larger magnets are sometimes too strong and will stick to each other when you're removing casualties. So the little magnets are strong enough, but they're not strong enough that you're going to want to tip your miniatures over and really shake them vigorously. But the smaller 4mm magnets, they are strong enough to hold down a lightweight miniature for sitting upright in the ride to a car, for moving the miniatures around on the board. And you don't have the problem of them clumping up and sticking to each other in the game. Whereas, the larger magnets are more than strong enough to turn the painted unit upside down, but the larger magnets, they really clack together, and you can sometimes end up with a big clump of models all stuck to each other, which I think is kind of a pain. So I think I prefer the smaller magnets. Maybe somewhere in the middle would be better. I'll test out the 4s on these Thens and see what I think. But you'll also want to adjust that depending on the size of your models. The Song of Ice and Fire miniatures are relatively lightweight plastic. You don't need a ton of strength to keep those in. So that's really up to you. So as a bonus, once you've got the washers on the bottom of your tray, it's easy to put another big magnet on there, and now you can stick the entire tray inside a tin-lined figure case, which is great for easy transport. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for another Jolly Lark.